Director of Community Engagement at Global Genes. We're gonna do something a little fun, a little silly here, and I'm gonna need 3 or 4 volunteers to do it. You are going to listen to a doctor on a video and buzz a buzzer if you don't understand what the doctor's talking about.
Thank you for meeting with me today. Unfortunately, I have some bad news. Your son's newborn screen came back positive for a pathogenic mutation on the C.
Was it pathogenic? Yeah. Nicole?
So pathogenic is the doctor speak for something that is disease-causing. So like a pathogenic mutation is something in your genes that is altered that then causes disease.
Okay, resume the video, please.
The FTR gene. And this gene encodes for a chloride channel. And when it
So chloride channels are basically like little gates that are activated by different molecules. So chloride's one of them, and it helps things open and close. So it's basically something that helps the cell do its functions.
Continue.
malfunctions, it causes something called cystic fibrosis. This mutation is typically inherited.
Hey, nobody buzzed. We can keep going.
Autosomally recessive, but sometimes it's de novo. And because...
So was it de novo? De novo means like a new mutation, means it wasn't inherited, it's just occurred spontaneously.
Because of this malfunction in the chloride channel, the secretions in the exocrine tissues of the body become very viscous and cause...
Secretions in the... We're on that.
So I would never actually speak like this. In cystic fibrosis, so secretions in the like mucus and things get blocked in parts of the body, and there's different glands, and so that's what I'm trying to say in a very bad way, is that mucus production in the glands gets very thick.
multiple problems in many different organ systems. Some of those common organ systems that we see issues in are pulmonary, such as bronchiectasis, chronic infections with things like Aspergillus or mycobacteria.
Which one? Aspergillus? Bronchiectasis? Yeah. Bronchiectasis is when the small airways of the lung become dilated and non-functional, and then you can get infections with different, like Aspergillus is a mold, mycobacteria is just a type of bacteria. It's more common.
You can end up with CF-related diabetes.
So diabetes, is it diabetes or CF-related? CF-related. Yeah, so cystic fibrosis can cause diabetes, so it's sort of it's just a subset of diabetes, but
and other pancreatic insufficiency causing malabsorption and failure to thrive. It can cause infertility and azoospermia in men.
That one I had to look up too. I forgot what that one was. It's like where the sperm don't function well. They don't produce the sperm correctly because they can't.
Well as hepatobiliary disease, among other things.
Relating to the liver and the gallbladder system, that's hepatobiliary.
Thanks. Fortunately, there are new treatments available, something called CF modulators, which can improve the protein's function, therefore decreasing sputum production.
Sputum is a fancy word for spit.
Yeah. And you know, the video is a bit longer, but I think we've beat up on Nicole enough. So we'll wrap up this part. Thank our contestants and volunteers. And as most game shows do, you get a go-home takeaway prize, which is your buzzer. But you can't take away the microphone. So please leave the microphone in the chair.
But can everyone have one of these buzzers to take home and share with their doctor at their next appointment?
Exactly. Well, good point. So as much as this may have seemed silly, I think it does, and as the real panel takes the stage, we'll get into it. I think it emphasizes how difficult it can be in the moment of listening to a doctor to check them if you need to check them. So maybe we're all emboldened, and from now on we'll think of mentally hitting a buzzer. Thank you all, volunteers. And Nicole will stay on the stage for the panel, and joining us will be Mike Porath from the Mighty and Kim Aldinger. And everyone on the panel, including myself, is a rare parent. Nicole, as you saw, is a pediatrician, and Kim is a neuro researcher, and Mike and I are just like media guys that have kids.
Not a doctor.
Yeah, least doctory guys, you know. So thank you all. Yeah, thank you all for doing this. Nicole, we'll do brief introductions, and you can defend yourself if you need.
So if anyone was here earlier, I apologize if this is a repeat. I'm a general pediatrician in the Bay Area, and I practice outpatient primary care. My daughter, Rosie, is my connection to rare disease, other than my patients that I've then accumulated, but she is about to be 7. She's got a rare genetic neurodevelopmental disorder called HNRNPH2. And so we have gotten very involved too. We're very fortunate. Her disorder had an already established patient advocacy group called the Yellow Brick Road Project, which my husband and I have gotten involved with, and we have such a great little family community. So this is my first time at Summit, and we're really excited to be here. And that's my little intro.
Kim?
Hi, Kim Aldinger. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Washington, and I have a research lab at Seattle Children's Hospital where we study the genetic mechanisms of neurodevelopmental disorders. I have 2 children. I have twins, 7 years old, one of whom has a rare genetic developmental and epileptic encephalopathy, and he has a variant in a gene called MAST4, which is still a variant of uncertain significance. So we have a small but growing project in my lab to actually understand what the protein and what the mutation are doing or not doing correctly. And we've also partnered with another family because the MAST genes in general are a family of 4 different proteins that have similar and related functions. So we co-founded a foundation to support both families and research in that area.
Hello, I'm Mike Porath. I'm the father of a 17-year-old with Dup15q syndrome, which is a rare chromosome disorder. It's basically autism and epilepsy and some profound disabilities kind of rolled into one. I also have 3 neurotypical boys, and I'm the founder and CEO of The Mighty, which is a publication that is really designed to help people share their stories, share their experiences. It all really came about because what my wife and I found is that the thing that helped us most, not just the medical team that we put together, which is fantastic, but it was really talking with, all of you, talking with other, parents of kids with the same disorders that my daughter has.
And maybe the only thing you need to know more about me is my son Lucas had Menkes syndrome, so I lived the rare parenting caregiver experience myself. So Nicole, I want to start with you, and maybe you could talk to us a bit about some of the common scenarios where patient, doctor, healthcare provider communication strains or struggles or breaks down.
I think there's lots of opportunity for breakdown. I mean, communication is so important, and I think we're taught in medical school that like the number one thing for errors is communication breakdowns. They have so many good protocols in surgery and all these things to make sure, like, are you doing it the right way, the right procedure, all these right things. And I think sometimes when it comes to the actual back and forth with your patient, we don't have those safety holds. And I think a lot of times, at least in my perspective as a general pediatrician, I see a lot of breakdown where families are scared of things and don't communicate that to me, or so then I don't really not understanding exactly what their goals are. And I think that when you don't understand your patient's goals, then you can't help develop good treatment plans for them. I also think that when you disagree, that's a huge communication breakdown, sometimes figuring out what the issue is. And I think patients are sometimes afraid to say what they disagree with, and then you're almost like circling around each other trying to figure out what the issue is. And then the third one I was thinking of was when you want something specific that maybe that doctor doesn't either want to do or doesn't have the expertise in. And I think sometimes when I assume there's probably a lot of breakdown there when you sort of want something that you're not getting. So I think those are probably the biggest ones.
Yeah, and I think we find ourselves in the rare disease space, you're thrust into a different medical system than you ever knew about before. And so for the early years, you are maybe a bit lost, but then if you go on a few more years, you start, as the topic of this session is, you start to become expert in your disease, and that creates different challenges. You may feel the need to lead the conversations with these care providers. And Kim, you told me about some strategies you developed that were pretty, to me, clever about consolidating care and where that worked, but then sometimes you found out it didn't work as much as you thought.
Yeah, so I think it's always helpful to ask when a provider says, okay, well, we'll see you back in 3 months and in 6 months and in 8 months. Is that really necessary, or is that just sort of due diligence from the providers, or is there really a goal or objective that you're trying to meet? And so can we bundle some of those things together? The example that I have is that in the neurodevelopmental clinic, they kept asking my son to have a BARE, which is a fancy hearing test that you have to be put under anesthesia for in the OR. And I said, okay, well, we can just do that the next time we have to put him under anesthesia for an MRI. And it took several layers of very specific questioning to understand that those two things were never going to be paired together, because a brain MRI for him just takes 30 minutes, maybe an hour, and a BARE, the OR time, is a minimum of an hour and a half. And so you could add an MRI onto the BARE, but you could never add a BARE onto something unless you're going to be in the OR already for hours and hours of time. And so that was never communicated. It was just that you need to have this test. And I was like, he hears fine. We don't need to have the test, and left it at that. And I didn't recognize it, except for asking lots of questions from different people at different times, why couldn't we pair these things together?
But on the other hand, when you can consolidate like that, and it's a shame that it comes to us to come up with these ideas. It never occurred to me for years, and then when it did, what a game changer. My son's in the hospital for overnights, and every 2 hours, a different team is waking him up for a different purpose. I said, could you guys get this in sync and just wake him up once in the night? Because the sleep is kind of important too. And finally, they, oh yeah, we can do that. Had I not asked, so. Mike, you're expert in the world of story, and you told me that one of the problems here in the dynamic is patients like their personal story and doctors like your biology story. Do you want to expand on that?
There's a great quote, and I don't know it word for word because it's like 3 sentences long, but it's from Victor Montoya, who's a doctor at the Mayo Clinic, and he focuses on patient centricity. And he said what often he thinks the best doctors are those they're looking to understand the patient's biology, but they're also trying to understand what matters to the person's biography. And so often I think where there's conflict is, as parents we're going in and there's something that we want to see changed. And we often don't articulate the goals sometimes the best way possible. And the doctor's sitting there really trying to understand what medically is happening, what biologically is happening. And I think as parents, we need to make sure that we're explaining those goals, explaining what matters to, in my case, it's my daughter's story. It could be that our biggest challenge is we can't, with some of her behaviors with the autism, we can't actually get her on the bus in the morning, right? And then we can talk about behavioral therapies and all these other things, but trying to find that match between the biography and the biology, I think is, that's often in conflict, or that's sometimes why parents and doctors are struggling because one's looking for the biology and the other's looking for the biography. So trying to, discuss those things, with your doctor and making sure that you explain what you're trying to achieve, can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, and staying with you for a second, Mike, I think you mentioned there was a time when you needed to bring in a video, and it shaped the care you got from neuropsychology?
Yeah, so at one point, I'll try to keep this story short, but my daughter didn't sleep for 7 straight days. And she was ripping her hair out and going through, all these different issues, and so she had to be admitted to a neuropsychiatric ward. I live in Los Angeles, it was at UCLA. And when she was admitted, the doctors there, although we had other doctors at UCLA, the ones there had never seen her before. And it was very difficult to explain DUP15Q to a team of doctors who are seeing all these other people. So that night, the night before we brought her in to be entered into the ward, board, we created like a quick 5-minute video, and we had actually filmed her over the last 6 months on different medicines that were not working for her. So we tried to track the data, but we actually did these little videos, and we just stitched them together. We were not a filmmaker the way Daniel is, but it was just to give them a sense of what we had seen, what she kind of looks like on these different medications. And the doctor just was like, nobody ever does this for us, and it was really helpful. And I think it helped us have a conversation with them about what we were seeing, because they could actually see it on the video. And it really helped with the treatment in terms of, she was there for a couple weeks. But I think in their minds, it really helped them make some decisions on what to try or not to try, because they could actually see what we had seen at home. So that was just, again, over the years, we've learned to really try to be good partners to the whatever doctors we're seeing. So often, I think, as rare parents, we're taught you have to fight, you have to be these warriors, and in some cases you do. But once you get in that room and the door closes, you are talking not to someone you're going to battle with, you are talking to a partner. And I think so we have to make sure that we make that shift. And now our best doctors have always been ones who are very smart, very invested, and ask a lot of questions. And so if you get a doctor who's asking questions, lean in, answer those questions, have those discussions. I think those are the ones that you are more likely to be more invested and to really help solve the problem, because they don't have all the answers. That was our, I think, biggest challenge at the beginning. We spent 2 years trying to get a diagnosis, going into each doctor, expecting them to know the answers. Well, there's 7,000 rare diseases, and they weren't even looking for a rare disease. So by partnering, you're much more likely, I think, to solve the issues that you're looking to solve.
Yeah, I love the idea of partnering. I think most of us in the rare disease space find so many partners. It can be a little overwhelming, so many specialists on the team. And I think the big leap, at least for me, going from your previous understanding of healthcare, the way it works for typical health, to how it now works in a rare disease space, was who leads that team, who coordinates all these specialists on the team. And that's one of the first conversations Nicole and I had. So give me your thoughts. And I know you made the point to me that pediatricians are a little more accustomed to this kind of teamwork, but
Yeah, that's what I was so happy to talk with Effie about that earlier. I think a lot of pediatricians are, but I know a lot aren't. I think I'm a little bit biased because this is like, now I understand, having been on both sides. I think a lot of docs being on the other side of the table really changes your perspective. But I think we all kind of joke that we do a lot more hand-holding in pediatrics than adults do. And I think sometimes, like, our teenage patients won't leave us because they're like, they won't help me the way you will. But I think you can really lean on your general pediatrician. And I think sometimes, or your general, your primary care, they get scared or intimidated by this. And I think sometimes if, again, you communicate your goal, like, I don't need you to solve this or figure this out per se, but I need you to help me or advocate for me or help me figure out what I should be thinking about, right? And we can do that. And so I think sometimes you don't have to be overwhelmed by, like, thinking, my doctor, like, my pediatrician doesn't know this disease. And it's like, yeah, but I'm here to be your home. I'm here to be your sounding board. And, so they can function in that purpose for you as well. I just think people forget to use them like that.
yeah, and I know in the next slide we're going to see Mike has this great example of his care team literally putting his daughter at the center of things. So if you tell us, how did that come about?
Yeah, so this is this slide. I took this photo in the audience at Duke 15Q Alliance has a conference every 2 years, which was this past summer. And this is my daughter's neurologist. She's chief of neurology at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, Shefali Jeste. And one tip I'd give you is become really good friends with your kid's doctor. So her boys are the same age as our boys, so we've become family friends over the years. And when she was talking about the different services that they provide at Children's Hospital, she went around and then, boom, she popped my daughter's photo in the middle of that. And I just thought how wonderful this was, because that is patient centricity, right? She talked about all the different areas of care that her team is providing and put my daughter in the middle. That's what you're really looking for. And it was just such a great example, because Shefali personifies this in so many ways. One of the things that I like so much about her over the years, she's been seeing my daughter, I think, for about a dozen years now, is that she's always been willing to get on the phone call or video call with our other doctors when we're trying to make a decision. We have neurologist, a psychologist, or pediatrician, and others. And she's always willing to talk with, others about what we're doing so that we can make the best decision for my daughter, not just from one perspective, but looking holistically about all the different things that we're dealing with, particularly if it's, medication related and things like that. So you're looking for, to work with doctors in this way where they're really putting your kid, front and center, and looking at all the other ways that they can support them.
And Kim, we've talked a bit about, you mentioned that the patient should feel comfortable or ready to say when they're A, don't understand, or B, aren't getting quite what they want. Just give me any examples of that or tips or advice for smoothing those moments.
Well, I think it's helpful, and we've talked a lot about communication already, and about making sure that your goals are aligned. And I know that even Nicole has mentioned asking for a second opinion and using that specific terminology. We had the experience where we had a provider who just wasn't listening, who gave us the typical, we've met so many kids like your son. I was like, no, yeah, we've seen so many kids just like him, and what you're describing is just not what it is. It's this other thing. And I was like, that doesn't sit right with me. I don't believe that. I went to the extreme. I went to the chair of the department and said, I want to switch immediately. But I think that asking for a second opinion is vernacular that physicians are comfortable with and used to, and without having to jump to that sort of extreme measure, but making sure that your goals are aligned. And if you meet a provider who is really supportive and you need a provider in a different discipline, ask them. If you have somebody who really understands and aligns with your goals, ask that person for, it's a neurologist. Do you have an orthopedist who you would recommend, or somebody who you might be able to put together on your team that way?
I would definitely agree. I mean, second opinions and third opinions are okay, and I think there's always like that ego, but at the same time, like, this is your health, this is your kid, this is you, this is your body, and so you feeling brave enough to say and do what you need to, and then really if you hopefully have a good physician who understands that that's very reasonable. And I don't think you have to be scared to say that for sure. You can say, and you can even say, I just need to do this for me. I think this sounds great, and I agree with this. I just want to make sure I've thought about all my options, and I want to get one more opinion. And you can even say, do you have someone you recommend? Because I want to make sure that I'm really, thinking this through. I assume, is there more than one way to think about this? And switching providers is okay. I have a small little story. Before we had my daughter's genetic diagnosis, they said she had cerebral palsy. And I was concerned about her hips, and as a pediatrician, I knew she was at risk for hip dysplasia. And so we got the x-ray, she has hip dysplasia. We got referred to an orthopedist, a very well-known orthopedist at an institution I will not, but a very nice one. And we walk in and he says, you need a brace and da-da-da-da. And then as he's walking out the door, says, does your daughter have any other medical conditions? And I almost fell over. She has cerebral palsy. What? And so it dawned on me, I was like, ugh, he's treating this like this is developmental hip dysplasia, not neuromuscular hip dysplasia. And I know as a doctor, those are different things, but patients may not. And so to me, that was a big tip. Did you not read our chart? And so I walked out, and maybe I should have said something right then and there, but I was like, you know what? We're getting another opinion. So we got another opinion, very different opinion. And then I went back and said, I want you guys at the same institution, I want you to know that these are two different things, and I am a little bit torn. And then their answer was, well, different reasonable docs can disagree about things. And so then I was like, okay, well, now I need a third opinion. And I went and got a third opinion. So I think it's sometimes you have to just trust that gut instinct. I'm having doctors, I felt sometimes it's almost not helpful to be a doc, but it is. But I can understand the way patients feel brushed off with things. And so we got a third opinion, and then I felt like this doctor really listened. And part of that third opinion was actually just a relationship change too. I felt like the first two had different opinions and they kind of blew me off, but the third one I felt finally listened and understood, and I was like, okay, I need a doc like this who's going to pay attention and understands the details and the complexity. And so sometimes it's more for me about the comfortability with that doc really than what they want to do. I just want to know that they understand me and my kid and they care.
Yeah, and I think often it's a surprise to us. It was a surprise to me to discover the person who leads the team might be me. If you're lucky, you might be in a hospital system that actually has a care coordinator or something, and palliative care can sometimes do that. There are people that can, but not for everyone. It's not in every system. It's not always available. So it may come to you, and then when if it is you, as Nicole was saying, a specialist may be focused on one thing, and you need to sort of redirect the conversation and say, yes, that, but right now, more this. And so I encourage everybody to grab a screenshot of this. Among the resources listed here on the top, is it right, Nicole prepared several different ways to broach several different topics, one of them sort of being that pivot. So just speak a little bit of what's in that document. People need to go check it out, but.
I made the document. I didn't want people to think that this is like, you have to be careful how you talk to your doctors. You say what you need to say. But I think some people do feel intimidated or want, sometimes the question gets lost if you're not sort of direct about what you want and how do you engage. So I was thinking about common things that I get asked and ways that you could phrase it to kind of be that partner where you're like, this is the piece that I know and this is where I need you. And so how do you kind of align yourself in your questions to make sure you're getting what you need? So I tried to think through asking for tests, asking for second opinions. What if I want to try something experimental? Is there somebody else who might know this? Like, sort of, what are good ways that you can phrase those things in case you are looking for help with those type of questions? Because I know it can get intimidating when you're in there. And then the other thing I wanted to make sure I mentioned is I think agenda setting is really important, and I think a good doc will do that for you, but a lot of them don't. And I think kind of knowing what you want out of the appointment is important, and making sure it's mentioned up front so that it doesn't become a like on the way out of the door you're like, but I need this thing, right? They teach us that like there's always that like one more thing doc thing, and how do you manage that as a doctor? So you don't want your one more thing to be like the thing you wanted to talk about. And so making sure that that gets set up front I think is really important. And that's where I love the fact that a lot of us have access to our physicians. My patients have access to me over email, so some of my patients will email me ahead of time and say, hey, I want to talk about this, this, and this, and it's sort of, then I know what's on the agenda, and I'm a little bit better prepared and make sure we have the right time length. So I think that especially if you have that ability, that's always nice to give your doc a heads up.
Yeah, and Mike has a community around the Mighty, so we had the experience in the Menke's, someone's doctor saying, well, ask the community, see what they say, and which was very humble, great humility. I admired that. It might feel a little bit like passing the buck, but we know this community is knowledgeable. So Mike, you had an example of turning to that and using that to your advantage, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So while a few years ago, my daughter's been on behavioral medications, and she had kind of reached a point where we needed to move her on to something else. And after 6 or 7 years where it had been helpful, and then it just wasn't anymore. And we tried a few things, and they all backfired. And we love our doctors. Like, it was like we were totally on board with the changes we were trying to make. And he said, well, I know that medications can affect kids with Dup 15q. I mean, he wasn't a specialist in this at all, but he was aware enough to know that that there were some trends and things like that. So we asked our community. We just went to we have a private Facebook group. We do have policies around not sharing, all of this. But what we did was we asked people about some different medications, and even like when you're going through puberty and these specific questions, and got a wealth of responses. So we deleted names and make sure everything was not identifiable. And we shared back with him, and it was really helpful, and it informed some of his decision making. And probably a better story, I'll keep it short. Most of the kids in our community, have seizures, and some drugs work better than others on particular types of seizures within our specific community. And so often people, they have their own neurologist that they're going to see who is not a specialist with Dup 15q syndrome. And so a number of our doctors who are specialists save up time to basically talk with any other doctors. And so we ask, people if, you may have a great neurologist but knows nothing about Dup 15q syndrome, doing a 15-minute call about this particular child with someone who knows a lot and has the data, that can actually be, a really helpful, exercise. So, there's, leveraging the community in lots of different ways, whether those are doctors that are specialists or whether it's family members, and families like yourselves. There are ways to get information back to, the doctor who's, it just helps inform them so that you two together as a partner, team can make the best decisions, for your kids or, your loved one who's affected by the rare disease.
We're coming up to probably a good time to go to your questions, if anyone has any. We've got a mic there and a mic there. If you don't have questions, we can keep talking. Wow, no questions. Really?
You're so clear.
Excellent. Here we go.
All right, I've got a question. So actually, it's for Mike, and the Mighty was such an incredible resource when I was diagnosed many years ago, and I remember always coming across those sort of listicles of top 10, things I wish my doctor knew, or and I'm just curious if you've ever done an analysis of what all those articles are saying, and maybe unearthed any major commonalities or things we hadn't thought of before that we should try to address.
Yes, we actually have. One of the ways we're using AI now is to run it across, we've published 50,000 stories and we have millions of conversations among people on the platform. It's all de-identified. We don't share personal health information or anything like that. But we have, on this particular question, I don't have it offhand, but we do look at things like that because we feel like if you look in aggregate of all of these conversations and opinions, they're all coming from patients and caregivers. There are a lot of answers. So what we've done is we create condition guides that are specific to different health conditions, and we have them. We pull all that data, and we also have them medically reviewed so that the doctors who are actually treating people with those are like, okay, this sounds right. Like you're not putting anything out there that's informing folks. So we're doing more of that because the tools to look at all of the content have gotten much better.
Any others?
Hello. Now, I may have missed this part of the panel discussion, but have any of you worked on programs that are being offered to physician organizations or associations on communicating with patients, patient communications, and especially culturally sensitive communications?
I can handle that. I work for a big organization, so I'm fortunate. My group has stuff like that. I mean, so I think some doctors do have that training, and we have a whole class I have to take every single year called The Art of Communicating with Patients. And so I like my group. My group cares about this, and they have made this something that doctors have to do every year, and we have a different topic. And one year, there definitely cultural competency and that type of thing has come up. But I think there needs to be more. I love the Rare Compassion program. I love. It's maybe Daniel should talk about it, but I've been a guest on that. It's basically a program that pairs a medical student with a rare disease patient or a rare disease family to learn about their lives. And then I have done some of the debrief sessions with the students to talk about just understanding that experience. And I think there needs to be more of that. I have a colleague I work with whose daughter also has a rare disorder, and her and I just have been brainstorming these last year, and I would love to put together a webinar or something. I do think that physicians need to understand the impact of their words. I want to collect all the list of things that people have heard from doctors that they should not hear and get that out there and change the training. I think that needs to be in there and understand sort of how traumatizing some things that doctors say can be for families. And so it's happening, but I wish it was happening more.
Because, there are CME requirements, and I think those are decided on a state-by-state basis. So, the great thing would be for your state, for your hospital to champion it, and it could potentially, with your state as an example, move throughout the country and become a CME requirement.
Right.
So, anything that, industry or Daniel, I'm sure I'll volunteer him to, can do. We'd just love to see that happen, that there's a requirement for doctors to go through this educational training.
There should be, absolutely. I think there probably are some, but.
One of the things we're trying to do more of is we've got 15,000 writers who have written stories on the Mighty, and so we've tried to bring some of our contributors actually to medical schools. And so, because what we've heard is that there's no training on on all of those, aspects. And so to get people, one, thinking about rare disease as a possibility when they're trying to figure out what's going on with someone, looking at that, the biology, but also to think about, hearing from people how they got their diagnosis. And in many cases, it wasn't in the most ideal way. It was a little bit of the video that you were showing before, and it's just all of these words, and it's hard to hear anything after you hear that your child was diagnosed with X. But trying to get to doctors, even in medical school, to start thinking more about that is one of the areas that we're doing a little bit more on.
Yeah, and as Nicole mentioned, the Rare Compassion program that Global Genes has, I think, is one of the ways we can reach those medical students and get them when they're young before they form their bad habits. And but I've seen, it's Rachel who introduced me that runs that program, and if any of you are interested, we usually recruit members in January. And whether it's you as the patient or the caregiver, we'd like to have you, or if you know medical students, we'd like to have them. But I've seen sort of some of those light bulb moments, or those recalibrations that they're working their way through the basics of medical school, and then you throw at them, here's all these exceptional cases, here's all the things you're not going to expect, but it's important, otherwise, I think we polled them to say, like, what percentage of your coursework is about rare disease, and it was less than 1%. And we're like, well, we just upped that.
Well, and we know that rare disease is so common, like not common, but like there's so many rare diseases, and so it's impossible, you're never going to know them all, but I think they need to understand that this community exists, and I think even some of my own colleagues, I feel like, are learning from me in terms of, what is rare disease and what is this, and that there's treatments available. I think so often that's always the big, like my colleagues are shocked about all these things, and they're like, what's happening? We're going through trials and doing stuff and drug repurposing, and they just don't know this world exists. And so I think that needs to change for sure. And I know one of the Rare Compassion panels I was on, one of the students said they had formed like a rare disease interest group at school. And I was like, this is so cool. I wish every medical school had like a rare disease interest group, and or something that could help kind of standardize this throughout, so that this is something that's taught in school.
Hi there. I really appreciated the distinguishment between the biology and biography. I think that's great. And I guess the broad question is, when do you know it's time to get a new primary care provider? And the background is, for many years, it was a successful relationship. Communication was really good, but something seems to have shifted. Could be me. But I guess, what would you say are norms to expect of a PCP? And what would be beyond kind of what they provide? So I guess I'm looking in, like, what types of communication, how frequently you can expect communication, and kind of accessibility, that kind of thing.
I mean, there's a phrase, like, it's the art of medicine, right? Like, so some of it's going to be different for each provider. And so I think you should always trust your gut. I mean, I think if you think this is not the relationship, it's probably not the right relationship. But I think we all have different boundaries too. And I know, like, some of us, and even in just think about my little group of 15, like, some of us make more after hours phone calls and some of us don't. And some of us communicate kind of like via email a lot more, and some don't, and some make an appointment to see me. And so I think you have to sort of figure out what that person's boundaries are, and like, what is the communication. And I think understanding, like, hey, is this something I can just call you about, or do I need to set up an appointment, and just understanding how your provider wants to communicate and if that's going to work for you. And so I think as long as you feel like it's clear, then maybe the relationship will be successful. But if you're hearing one thing, like, no, I'm available, I'm accessible, and they're not accessible, then clearly there's a communication breakdown. And I think what I will say is hard on my end of it, I have a family too, right? Like, I want to be there for my patients. I want to, like, when a mom calls me and is like, I need to talk to you right now, and it's 5 o'clock and I got to go to soccer pickup or whatever, like, I want to do that, but I'm a human. I have my own life. And so I think that's where sometimes we struggle in trying to find those boundaries, like, to be available for our patients and make sure that we're giving them the attention they need versus not. So I don't know that there's like a general, like, this is how much availability you should have, but you should feel supported, that at least you have a way of getting what you need, and that you're being heard, and that message is, or in some way. So I don't know if that answers your question.
We may be just about at time. I think we could give each of you a closing thought if you had one to share, maybe a key takeaway piece of advice.
Just remember, I think that you have a seat at the table, and that you're trying to be a partner with your physician. You guys, you have your expertise, which is your body, your condition, your family, the biography. I love that. And they are there for the biology and the coordination and that. And so how do you make sure that you're working together to kind of have that common goal and understanding what the agenda is, what the goal is. And I think communicating your fears and being vulnerable and letting them know, I think is a good way to have a partnership with your physician.
I think asking for what the best way is to communicate is really key also, especially in the context of the appointment. Sometimes you might show up at an appointment and you're watching Nicole's video, you're thrown a lot of information. I know I typically have to digest that, go home, in the drive on the way home, when I get home, I have this litany of questions. And so now how am I going to communicate those questions except for at the next 6-month appointment? Or am I going to do I have to write them down? Or is my chart the best approach, or email, or whatnot? So even saying that these are your action items following this, and what are my action items following this, just like I would in any kind of meeting, I found has sort of been helpful. I also like to try out providers sometimes, like if there's like an acute issue, sort of paying attention to like when we go to the ED and there's somebody on call and we really liked that person, to sort of make note of that, or the pediatricians, the PCPs, there are 10 of them, and we have our primary one who we really like, but we have no experience of any of the others, and so sometimes I'll just take the first appointment for anything, for whatever it is, and then that gives an opportunity to get the experience with somebody else to see if it might be a better fit or not than the primary provider. In different times, you could be looking for different things, and whether or not that's different communication styles or objectives, I think are important to keep in mind too.
I'm going to end when I have 10 seconds. I'm going to go like 40 seconds. Just to end with a story from my perspective. My daughter's first EEG that she'd ever had came back with very high beta waves, which our doctor looked at and said, this is really strange. It looks like she's on Valium or something like that. He said, can you ask people in your community if anybody else, has these high beta waves? And we did, and it turned out several other people did. Fast forward 15 years, we've done a number of studies on this. It's now the main biomarker in a clinical trial that we are working on a big pharmaceutical company with. And it all started with a conversation, a partnership between a doctor and a parent trying to figure out, what's going on here. So those conversations that you have can lead to really big things.
And for mine, I think I learned it from Nicole. I really like the phrase, who else should I be talking to? It can be a gentler way of asking for a second opinion, but it can be even a reminder to yourself. Maybe you're talking to your pulmonary guy and he says, well, I assume you checked in with GI, and you hadn't checked in with GI, and now all of a sudden, like, we're all scurrying to catch up on that front. But I like that one a lot, and it can be used outside of the medical realm too. You can always learn more. But now they're an ally in helping you find more answers and more specialists, and it's not the confrontational relationship. Well, thank you all for coming.